spring, 1241. In the stone halls of Prague, King Wenceslas I of Bohemia receives news that turns his blood cold. A messenger, mud-splattered and exhausted from riding without rest for 3 days straight, delivers word that makes every nobleman in the room go silent. The Polish army has been annihilated. Duke Henry II the Pious is dead, his head paraded on a Mongol spear. The Teutonic Knights, the Templars, the Hospitallers, the finest fighting men Christendom could muster, lie dead in a field near Legnica, their ears cut from their heads and stuffed into 9 leather sacks as trophies. And the army that did this storm from the east, this horde of horsemen who move faster than any European army thought possible, they're still coming. They're not stopping. They're not slowing down. They're already burning their way toward Hungary, and nothing, absolutely nothing Europe has thrown at them has even slowed their advance. For 2 years, whispers had been spreading westward, like smoke before a wildfire. Cities in Russia had fallen, not through siege, not through negotiation, but through complete and utter destruction. Ryazan had been wiped from the earth so thoroughly that it was never rebuilt to its former glory. Vladimir burned. Kiev, the mother of all Russian cities, was reduced to rubble and corpses. The stories seemed impossible, the kind of exaggerations that soldiers tell after defeats to excuse their failures. 100,000 horsemen who could cover 80 miles in a single day. Archers who could shoot accurately from galloping horses at ranges European bowmen couldn't match standing still. Generals who coordinated armies separated by hundreds of miles with a precision that seemed supernatural. Surely these were legends, the stuff of frightened imaginations magnifying a raiding party into an apocalypse. But the refugees streaming westward told a different story, and the consistency of their accounts was chilling. They spoke of cities surrounded in days when it should have taken weeks for any army to arrive. They described arrow storms so dense they darkened the sky, volleys that could turn a cavalry charge into a field of dead horses, and dying knights in minutes. They told of commanders who used smoke fire, catapults, throwing explosives, things no European army had ever seen, and most terrifying of all, they spoke of a discipline, a coordination, a military science that made European warfare look like children playing at combat. These weren't barbarians. These weren't wild raiders. This was something entirely different, something Christendom had no frame of reference to understand. The Mongol Empire by 1241 stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Vienna, the largest contiguous land empire in human history. It had conquered China's northern kingdoms, destroyed the Khwarezmian Empire in Persia, subjugated the Russian principalities, and now it was turning its full attention to Central Europe. At its head was Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan himself, the man who had unified the Mongol tribes and unleashed them on the world. But the true architect of what was about to happen to Europe was an elderly man named Subutai, a general so brilliant that modern military historians compare him to Hannibal and Napoleon, a tactician who had spent more than a decade planning this invasion, gathering intelligence, mapping roads, assessing the military capacity of every kingdom in his path. Europe in 1241 was fragmented, a patchwork of competing kingdoms, duchies, and principalities more interested in fighting each other than in recognizing threats from the outside. Poland was divided among rival princes. Hungary was dealing with refugee Cumans and internal political tensions. The Holy Roman Empire was embroiled in conflicts with the papacy. There was no unified command, no coordinated defense, no standing armies ready to mobilize. Medieval European warfare was built around heavily armored knights, individual combat prowess, feudal levies that took weeks to gather, and siege warfare that could last months. It was a system that had evolved over centuries to handle threats from other European kingdoms, other knights, other castles. It was completely unprepared for what was coming. The Mongols didn't fight like Europeans. They didn't march in columns along roads. They didn't stop to besiege every fortified position. They didn't challenge enemies to honorable combat. They moved across terrain European armies considered impassable, appeared where they were thought to be hundreds of miles away, and hit targets with a speed that seemed impossible. Their armies operated in multiple columns, separated by vast distances, yet converging on targets with clockwork precision. They used intelligence networks that had been mapping European roads and assessing military capabilities for over a decade. They employed psychological warfare, spreading terror deliberately to break enemy morale before battles even began. And when they did fight, they fought with tactics and weapons that European armies simply had no answers for. The composite bow carried by every Mongol warrior could shoot over 300 yards at maximum range, outranging contemporary European bows and comparable to the English longbow, which wouldn't become famous for another century. Made from layers of wood, horn, and sinew bound with animal glue, these bows could punch through armor at close range and kill horses at distances where European arrows fell harmlessly short. Mongol warriors trained with these weapons from childhood, learning to shoot accurately while riding at full gallop, to reload while turning in the saddle, to execute the famous Parthian shot, turning backward in full retreat to loose arrows at pursuing enemies. Each warrior carried 2 or 3 bows and 60 or more arrows, and could put 12 arrows into a target per minute. When a Mongol army opened fire, it was like being caught in a mechanical storm. Thousands upon thousands of arrows falling with deadly accuracy, wave after wave without pause. But the bows were only part of it. Every Mongol warrior was mounted, but not on the massive war horses of European knights. Mongol ponies were small, shaggy, tough animals that could survive on grass and could cover staggering distances without exhausting themselves. Each warrior had multiple horses, changing mounts regularly to maintain speed over long campaigns. They could ride for days with minimal rest, living off mare's milk and dried meat, moving with a mobility that European armies simply couldn't match. A European army that marched 10 miles in a day was making good time. Mongol forces routinely covered 40, 50, even 60 miles when speed was essential. They appeared where they were supposed to be days away, struck before defenders could organize, and vanished before reinforcements arrived. Their organization was revolutionary. The Mongol army was structured on a decimal system, units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, each with clear chains of command. But unlike European armies where orders had to be relayed verbally down through ranks of nobles who might or might not obey, the Mongol system emphasized what modern military theorists call mission command. Officers were given objectives and expected to achieve them however they saw fit. Subordinate commanders had enormous latitude to make tactical decisions without waiting for orders. This allowed Mongol armies to react to changing battlefield conditions with a flexibility European forces couldn't match. When part of a Mongol formation was engaged, other parts could maneuver independently to support, flank, or pursue without needing someone to ride back to headquarters for instructions. And they used combined arms warfare centuries before it became standard. Light cavalry armed with bows would harass and wear down enemies. Heavy cavalry with lances and swords would deliver shock charges at decisive moments. Siege engineers, captured from Chinese and Persian campaigns, operated sophisticated artillery, catapults that threw explosives and incendiary projectiles. Infantry units, often auxiliaries from conquered peoples, would hold positions or assault fortifications. All of these elements worked together in coordinated operations planned with a sophistication that European commanders, who typically just lined up their knights and charged, simply couldn't comprehend. The feigned retreat was the Mongol signature tactic, and it was devastatingly effective. Mongol cavalry would engage European forces, loose a few volleys of arrows, then turn and flee in apparent panic and disorder. European knights, seeing their enemies running, would break formation and give chase, exactly as they'd been trained to do their entire lives. Chasing down fleeing enemies was how medieval warfare worked. Except the Mongols weren't actually fleeing. They were luring pursuers away from their infantry, away from defensive positions, spreading them out, exhausting their horses. And then, when the Europeans were strung out, disorganized, and vulnerable, the Mongols would wheel around and attack with overwhelming force. Or fresh Mongol units hidden in reserve would hit the flanks and rear. What looked like a panicked rout was actually a carefully choreographed maneuver that required immense discipline and skill to execute. European knights fell for it again and again because everything in their military culture told them that pursuing fleeing enemies was correct, was honorable, was how warriors behaved. Communication on the Mongol battlefield was equally sophisticated. Commanders positioned themselves on high ground where they could observe the entire engagement. Orders were transmitted through a system of flags, whistles, and drums that could direct unit movements across miles of battlefield. Compare this to European combat, where individual knights charged when they felt like it, where there was essentially no way to coordinate once battle was joined, where commanders fought in the melee and couldn't even see what was happening beyond 100 yards. The Mongols were fighting a different kind of warfare entirely, one based on coordination, timing, and executing complex tactical plans under fire. And then there was the intelligence gathering. For over a decade before the invasion of Europe, Mongol spies had been moving through Russia, Poland, Hungary, and beyond. They mapped roads, assessed city defenses, identified political divisions, determined how long it would take various kingdoms to mobilize their armies. They posed as merchants, as travelers, as refugees. They gathered information that Subutai, the mastermind behind the invasion, used to plan operations with a level of detail that was unprecedented in medieval warfare. When the Mongol armies moved, they knew exactly where they were going, what they would face, what routes would support their horses, where enemies would likely concentrate. Europeans, by contrast, often didn't know enemy armies were approaching until they were already in sight. The man who orchestrated all of this was Subutai, and his story is worth understanding because he represents something fundamental about the Mongol military system. He wasn't born into nobility. He was the son of a blacksmith, started his military career as a scout in Genghis Khan's army, but the Mongols promoted based on ability, not birth. If you were competent, if you won battles, if you could execute the Khan's strategies, you rose. Subutai rose higher than almost anyone in Mongol history except Genghis Khan himself. By 1241, he was in his 60s, so heavy that he had to be transported to battlefields in a cart. But his mind was still the sharpest military instrument in the world. Subutai had commanded campaigns across Asia for decades. He'd conquered northern China, Persia, and Russia. He'd coordinated operations across thousands of miles, directing multiple armies to converge on objectives with timing measured in days. He understood logistics, the movement of supplies and remounts that allowed Mongol armies to maintain their operational tempo. He understood deception, using feints and false intelligence to mislead enemies about Mongol intentions. He understood terrain, choosing battlefields that favored his cavalry and disadvantaged his enemies. And most importantly, he understood that European armies were predictable. They would charge. They would break formation to pursue fleeing enemies. They would concentrate their forces instead of dispersing them. And all of these predictable behaviors could be exploited. The invasion plan Subutai developed was characteristically brilliant in its complexity. The main objective was Hungary, the rich plains perfect for Mongol cavalry operations, the kingdom that had given shelter to Cuman refugees the Mongols considered rebels. But Subutai knew that Poland, Bohemia, and other northern kingdoms might try to come to Hungary's aid, so he planned a diversionary campaign through Poland to tie down northern European armies and prevent them from reinforcing the Hungarians. Multiple Mongol armies, with the entire invasion force estimated by contemporary Mongol sources at around 40,000 men, would invade from different directions. One force under Batu Khan and Subutai himself would attack Hungary directly through the Carpathian mountain passes. A second army would sweep through Transylvania and attack Hungary from the southeast. And a third, smaller force would raid through Poland, destroy any armies they encountered, and create so much chaos that no help could be sent south. It was a plan that required multiple armies separated by hundreds of miles to coordinate their movements, to arrive at their objectives on schedule, to not get distracted by targets of opportunity. It required discipline, timing, and trust in subordinate commanders that European military systems simply didn't possess. And it worked with a precision that would have been impossible for any European kingdom to match. The Polish campaign began in winter of 1240 and early 1241. The Mongol forces under Orda Khan, Baidar, and Kadan crossed into Poland and began systematic destruction. They sacked Sandomierz, defeated Polish armies at Tursko and Chmielnik, and on Palm Sunday, March 24, 1241, they burned Krakow, the capital. Boleslaw the Chaste, the Prince of Krakow, abandoned his city before the Mongols arrived, and what followed was the familiar pattern. The population was slaughtered, the city looted, and then burned to the ground. A trumpeter who sounded the alarm of the invaders' approach was allegedly shot in the throat with an arrow. And to this day, a trumpeter plays a melody from the towers of St. Mary's Basilica in Krakow that stops abruptly mid-note, commemorating this moment. Duke Henry II, the Pious of Silesia, watched these catastrophes unfold and made a fateful decision. He would gather an army and stop the Mongols before they could ravage more of Poland. He was a pious man, hence his epithet, a capable ruler, and he had support from some of the finest warriors in Christendom. The Teutonic Knights sent forces. Small contingents of Knights Templar and Knights Hospitaller arrived. Polish nobles brought their retinues. He assembled an army estimated at 25,000 to 30,000 men, a substantial force by medieval standards. And most importantly, King Wenceslas of Bohemia was marching to join him with 50,000 men. If they could link up, they would vastly outnumber the Mongol raiding force. The Mongol commanders knew this, of course. Their intelligence network had informed them of both European armies, their sizes, their locations, and their intended movement. And they made a simple calculation. Defeat Henry before Wenceslas arrives. Don't let them combine forces. Hit them separately when you still have numerical advantage. It was basic military strategy, the kind of decision that competent commanders make. But what made it devastating was the speed with which the Mongols executed it. They force-marched to intercept Henry's army near Legnica in Silesia, reaching the battlefield on April 9, 1241. Wenceslas was still a day's march away. The Europeans would have to fight alone. The field near Legnica was flat, good cavalry country. Henry divided his army into 4 divisions. The right wing was Polish cavalry under a knight named Sulislaus. The left wing was commanded by Duke Mieszko the Fat. Henry himself commanded the reserves, both cavalry and infantry. And at the front were members of the military orders, the Teutonic Knights, the Templars, the Hospitallers, men who'd taken religious vows to fight for Christendom, armored in the finest plate and mail money could buy, mounted on powerful war horses, trained from youth in the arts of combat. These were not peasant levies. These were professional warriors, the absolute best Europe had to offer. The Mongol force numbered perhaps 8,000 to 20,000 based on contemporary sources, though the exact numbers remain uncertain. But they were organized in their typical fashion, heavy cavalry in the center, light cavalry on the flanks, and they took the high ground where their commanders could observe and direct the battle. And then they opened with their standard tactic. A vanguard of light cavalry rode forward and began harassing the European lines with arrows. Not committing to engagement, just shooting and falling back, drawing out responses. The European commanders responded exactly as predicted. They sent out scouting parties of knights to drive off these annoying horse archers. The knights charged, and the Mongol cavalry retreated, just out of reach, drawing them farther from their own lines. And this is where the Mongol tactic became lethal. Once the European knights were separated from their infantry, once they were strung out in pursuit, the Mongols created a smokescreen. Contemporary chronicles describe smoke obscuring the battlefield, though whether this came from early gunpowder devices brought from China or simply from burning grass and brush remains uncertain. Either way, suddenly the battlefield was obscured. The European knights found themselves riding blind, unable to see their own forces, unable to coordinate, confused and disoriented. And then the Mongol archers opened fire in earnest. From multiple directions, from ranges where European weapons were useless, thousands of arrows began falling on the confused knights. Horses screamed and fell. Arrows found gaps in armor, struck faces through visors, hit joints and weak points. The knights tried to charge toward their tormentors, but every time they thought they'd close the distance, the Mongol cavalry would wheel away, still shooting backward as they retreated, maintaining the range gap. Meanwhile, other Mongol units were hitting the isolated European infantry from the flanks and rear. Without the knights to protect them, the peasant levies were slaughtered. Henry's army disintegrated. Units tried to retreat but found themselves surrounded. The military orders, the finest knights in Europe, were methodically destroyed by horse archers who never even came within sword reach. Henry himself tried to flee the battlefield with 3 bodyguards and was cut down and killed. The Mongols beheaded him, stuck his head on a spear, and later paraded it before the walls of Legnica. And then came the grisly accounting. Mongol warriors moved through the field of dead and dying, cutting the right ear off every corpse to provide an accurate count of enemy casualties. Medieval sources claim they filled 9 leather sacks with ears, though this detail, like many numbers from medieval battles, may be more symbolic than literal. What we know with certainty is that Duke Henry's army suffered catastrophic losses, with most historians agreeing that the majority of his 25,000 to 30,000 men were killed or scattered. The battle lasted a few hours. Duke Henry's army ceased to exist as a fighting force. The finest military orders in Christendom had been destroyed by horse archers using tactics European knights had no effective counter to. And when King Wenceslas finally arrived with his 50,000 men, he found a field of corpses and a Mongol force that had already moved on. He retreated back to Bohemia to defend his own kingdom, and the Mongols sent a small force to harass him, then turned south to rejoin the main army in Hungary. The diversionary campaign had worked perfectly. Northern Europe was in chaos. No help would be coming to Hungary, and Subutai's main plan could proceed without interference. While Poland burned, Subutai and Batu Khan were executing the primary invasion of Hungary, and what happened there was even more catastrophic. King Bela IV of Hungary had known the Mongols were coming. He'd received letters from Batu Khan in 1237 and 1238 demanding his unconditional surrender. He'd ignored them. Refugees from Russia had brought warnings. He'd listened, but not really prepared. And then, in 1239, a large group of Cumans, nomadic peoples fleeing the Mongol advance, had arrived at his borders asking for asylum. Bela had let them in, nearly 40,000 Cumans under their king Kothin. His reasoning was sound enough. The Cumans were experienced nomadic warriors who knew how to fight Mongols. They could bolster his forces, but this decision gave Batu Khan the justification he needed. The Cumans, from the Mongol perspective, were rebels, subjects who'd fled Mongol rule. By harboring them, Bela had committed an act of hostility. More importantly, the Cumans' presence in Hungary created massive internal tensions. Hungarian nobles resented these foreign nomads being given lands and privileges. Rumors began circulating that the Cumans were actually Mongol spies, that they'd betray Hungary when the invasion came. The situation was a powder keg waiting for a spark. In March 1241, the Mongol armies began entering Hungary through multiple routes. Subutai's main force attacked through the Vereki Pass in the Carpathians, a supposedly impenetrable route that Bela had fortified with natural obstacles, felled trees, ditches, traps. The Mongols cleared all of it in 3 days and annihilated the Hungarian army defending the pass. The speed of their advance was called lightning by a contemporary observer. Bela had thought he had 2 weeks before the Mongols could threaten his heartland. He had 4 days. As Bela tried to mobilize his army at Pest, the situation with the Cumans exploded. Someone, possibly Mongol agents spreading rumors, Possibly paranoid Hungarians acting on their own attacked the Cuman camp and murdered King Kothan. The Cumans, believing they'd been betrayed, went berserk. They fled south, but as they went, they ravaged the Hungarian countryside, burning, looting, killing Magyar civilians in revenge. The Austrian troops that Bela had called for help took one look at this chaos and went home. Bela's mobilization was a disaster. Many regional forces never reached Pest, either destroyed by Mongols before they arrived or slaughtered by vengeful Cumans. The army Bela finally assembled was perhaps 100,000 men on paper, but the reality was far less organized and far less united. The Hungarian army moved north to confront the Mongols, who appeared to be retreating. This was, of course, a Mongol strategic withdrawal, luring the Hungarians forward. Bela's nobles, seeing enemies apparently running away, became convinced the Mongol threat was overblown, that Bela was being overcautious, maybe even cowardly. After a week of forced marches with constant Mongol harassment, the Hungarian army reached the Sajo River and found the Mongol army waiting on the opposite bank. The size of Bela's force remains disputed by historians, with estimates ranging from a modest 10,000 to claims of 100,000, though the truth likely falls somewhere between these extremes. Bela positioned his forces in a fortified camp of wagons, a tried and tested defense against nomadic armies. He controlled the main bridge. He thought his position was strong. He had no idea what was about to happen. The Battle of Mohi began on the night of April 10th, 1241, with the main engagement taking place on April 11th, just 2 days after the disaster at Legnica. Subutai's plan was elegant and brutal. A diversionary force under Batu Khan would assault the main bridge, engaging the Hungarian defenders and holding their attention. Meanwhile, Subutai himself would take a larger force several miles north, find or construct a ford, cross the river undetected, and attack the Hungarian camp from the rear. It required precise timing, night movement, and perfect coordination, and it worked flawlessly. Batu's assault on the bridge began in darkness. The Hungarian crossbowmen defending it fought back fiercely, inflicting casualties and holding the position. But then the Mongols brought up their siege engines, catapults that threw stones and incendiary projectiles, clearing the defenders off the bridge approaches. Under cover of this bombardment, Mongol cavalry forced a crossing. By dawn, they'd established a foothold on the Hungarian side and were pushing toward the fortified camp. The Hungarians, seeing enemies forcing the bridge, concentrated their attention and forces on this threat, which is exactly what Subutai wanted. Meanwhile, Subutai had crossed the river to the north with the bulk of the Mongol army. Sources suggest his engineers may have built a temporary bridge during the night, or they may have found a fordable point. Either way, by morning, tens of thousands of Mongol cavalry were positioned behind the Hungarian camp, completely undetected. When they attacked, the Hungarians found themselves caught between two forces, Batu's army in front, Subutai's behind. The fortified wagon camp, which should have been a defensive advantage, became a trap. The Hungarian forces tried to break out, to charge through Batu's lines and escape the encirclement. And here Subutai showed his understanding of human psychology. He deliberately left a gap in the Mongol lines, an apparent escape route. Panicked Hungarian soldiers saw this opening and fled through it, abandoning their positions, throwing away their weapons, running for their lives. Exactly as Subutai intended. Because the gap wasn't an escape route, it was a killing ground. As Hungarian forces streamed through in disorder, Mongol horse archers lined both sides and opened fire. It was a slaughter. Men fell by the hundreds, by the thousands. Those who made it through found themselves pursued by Mongol cavalry, who ran them down and killed them over a pursuit that lasted miles. The Mongol bombardment of the camp itself was devastating. Those catapults weren't just throwing stones. Based on what we know of Mongol siege warfare adapted from Chinese campaigns, they were likely using incendiary projectiles and possibly early explosive devices. though the exact nature of these weapons remains debated by military historians. The camp caught fire. Soldiers trapped inside were burned alive or killed by falling debris. When Mongol heavy cavalry finally charged into the camp, there was barely any resistance left. King Bela himself fled, riding hard with a small guard, eventually making it to Croatia, where he hid on an island in the Adriatic, but his army was annihilated. The scale of the disaster remains debated by historians, with casualty estimates ranging from 10,000 to as many as 60,000 dead, though precise figures are impossible to determine from the fragmentary medieval sources. What is certain is that the Hungarian military force ceased to exist as an organized fighting entity. The Hungarian nobility was decimated. Counts, barons, bishops, all the leadership of the kingdom lay dead in that field. For the next 10 months, Mongol armies ravaged Hungary. They burned Pest on Christmas Day. They sacked Gran, the largest and richest city in the region. They systematically destroyed agricultural infrastructure, killed livestock, devastated the population. The demographic toll was staggering, with historians estimating that between a quarter and half of Hungary's roughly 2 million people died during the Mongol invasion, making it one of the most catastrophic population losses in medieval European history. The psychological impact across Europe was immense. Within the space of 2 days, the Mongols had destroyed the two largest armies Christendom could field. Poland was devastated. Hungary was in ruins, and the Mongol armies showed no signs of stopping. They raided into Austria, into Croatia, into Serbia. Small Mongol detachments penetrated as far west as the outskirts of Vienna. Every medieval chronicler who wrote about these events described them in apocalyptic terms. This wasn't just an invasion. This was the end of the world. The horsemen of the Book of Revelation, the scourge of God sent to punish Christian sins. European rulers panicked. Kings and princes sent desperate messages to each other, trying to organize some kind of coordinated defense. The Pope called for a new crusade, not against the Muslims in the Holy Land, but against the Mongol threat that was literally at Europe's doorstep. But the fragmented political structure of medieval Europe made unified action nearly impossible. The Holy Roman Empire was embroiled in conflicts with the papacy. France and England were busy with their own disputes. Italy was a patchwork of warring city-states. Nobody could agree on who would lead a unified army, who would pay for it, where it would assemble. And all the while, Mongol scouts were reportedly being seen as far west as Germany. And then, in spring of 1242, something extraordinary happened. The Mongol armies withdrew. They didn't retreat under pressure. They weren't defeated in battle. They simply turned around and went back east, leaving behind a devastated landscape, but not attempting to hold territory or advance further west. European chroniclers called it a miracle, direct divine intervention to save Christendom from destruction. But the reality was more prosaic and perhaps more ominous. In December 1241, Ögedei Khan, the supreme Khan of the Mongol Empire, and Genghis Khan's chosen successor, had died in Karakorum, the Mongol capital. The cause was likely related to his heavy drinking, a vice that had concerned his advisors for years. News of his death took months to reach the armies in Europe, traveling the thousands of miles across the steppe through the Mongol relay system. But when news of Ögedei's death finally reached them, probably in early 1242, the implications were immediate. Mongol law required that all princes of the blood return to Mongolia for the Kurultai, the great assembly that would elect the next Khan. Batu Khan, as a grandson of Genghis Khan, was required to attend, or at least send representatives. More importantly, the succession was going to be contested. Batu had enemies among the other Mongol princes, particularly Guyuk, Ögedei's son. If Batu didn't protect his interests in the succession struggle, he could lose everything. Subutai reportedly wanted to continue the campaign. Some sources suggest he was planning invasions of Austria, Italy, and Germany, that the Mongol forces were close to completing their objective of reaching the Atlantic Ocean, the Great Sea. But Batu overruled him. Whether this was purely due to succession politics or whether other factors played a role, such as the casualties the Mongol forces had sustained or logistical challenges, remains debated by historians. The armies withdrew, crossing back over the Carpathians, moving back through devastated Russian lands, ultimately settling in the territories north of the Caspian Sea that would become the Golden Horde. Europe had been saved not by its military prowess, not by divine intervention, but by internal Mongol politics and the death of a Khan half a world away. But this wasn't quite the end. Historians debate what would have happened if Ögedei hadn't died. Could the Mongols have conquered all of Europe? The traditional view is yes, that the military disparity was so great that nothing could have stopped them. More recent scholarship suggests it's more complicated. The Mongol armies had taken casualties, more than they typically admitted. Hungary's Great Plain had room for Mongol horses, but the forests of Central and Western Europe were different terrain, less suited to cavalry operations. Castles were becoming more sophisticated, and siege warfare was time-consuming. The logistical challenges of maintaining armies so far from Mongol bases were significant. Additionally, European kingdoms were starting to adapt. Bela IV, after the Mongols withdrew, launched a massive program of castle building across Hungary, stone fortifications on defensible positions, strong enough to resist Mongol siege tactics. He reformed his military, created more professional forces, and established better intelligence networks. When the Mongols did return to Hungary in 1285 under Nogai Khan, they found a very different situation. The Hungarians were prepared, the castles held, the Mongols were repulsed and eventually withdrew. Europe had learned, adapted, and would not be caught unprepared again. The invasion also accelerated the spread of technologies from east to west. Whether the Mongols actually deployed gunpowder weapons during the European campaign remains debated among scholars, though they certainly possessed such technology from their Chinese conquests and may have used incendiary projectiles. What is clear is that knowledge of these Eastern innovations began reaching Europe during this period. Within decades, European engineers were developing their own versions. The Mongol composite bow, while never widely adopted in Europe due to its complexity and the years of training required, influenced European archery development. More broadly, the Pax Mongolica, the period of relative peace within the vast Mongol Empire, opened up trade routes and cultural exchange. Merchants, diplomats, and travelers like Marco Polo could journey from Europe to China and back. Technologies, ideas, and knowledge that had been confined to specific regions began spreading across Eurasia. The military lessons took longer to sink in. European armies remained focused on heavy cavalry and individual combat prowess for centuries. But the idea that mobility, coordination, and combined arms tactics could defeat larger, more heavily armored forces was demonstrated at Mohi and Legnica. Future military thinkers would study these battles, and while it would take hundreds of years, eventually European military doctrine would evolve to incorporate some of the principles the Mongols had mastered. On a more immediate level, the invasion reshaped Eastern European politics and society. The Russian principalities remained under Mongol control for over 200 years, the period known as the Mongol Yoke or the Tatar Yoke. This had profound effects on Russian development, cutting it off from many Western European cultural and political movements, influencing its governmental structures, and creating a legacy of authoritarian rule that some historians argue persists to this day. Poland and Hungary, while devastated, eventually recovered, but the memory of the invasion remained a cultural trauma for generations. The Mongol withdrawal also had consequences for the Mongol Empire itself. Batu Khan established the Golden Horde as a semi-autonomous ulus, ruling vast territories in Russia and around the Caspian and Black Seas. But he never did conquer Western Europe. Succession struggle after Ögedei's death dragged on for years. Guyuk eventually became Khan, and his relationship with Batu was so hostile that civil war seemed inevitable. Guyuk died in 1248 while on his way to confront Batu, with some historians speculating about assassination, though the evidence remains circumstantial. By the time Mongol Khan stabilized the succession in 1251, the momentum for European conquest was gone. Subutai retired and died in 1248, taking with him the strategic vision that had planned the invasion. Without him, without political unity, the moment had passed, and perhaps, given the trajectory of Mongol history, Europe's salvation came at exactly the right moment. The Mongol Empire, after Munka's death in 1259, fractured into separate khanates that eventually fought each other more than they fought external enemies. The Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan dynasty in China all became effectively independent. If the invasion of Europe had continued in 1242, it might have succeeded in conquering more territory. But holding it long-term, integrating it into a vast empire that was already beginning to fragment, that's a different question. What remains indisputable is the sheer scale of the catastrophe that struck Europe in 1241. Two major armies annihilated in 2 days. Poland and Hungary devastated to a degree that took decades to recover from. Half of Hungary's population dead, cities burned, agricultural infrastructure destroyed. The entire social and military order of medieval Europe proven inadequate against an enemy that fought according to completely different principles. European chroniclers, trying to make sense of what had happened, described the Mongols in terms that mixed racism, religious fervor, and genuine terror. They were Tartars, demons from Tartarus, hell on earth. They were God's punishment for Christian sins. They were the apocalypse made flesh. But beneath the hysteria, there was a grudging recognition of something else. The Mongols were organized. They were disciplined. They had generals of genius and soldiers of incredible skill. They used technology, tactics, and strategy at a level European commanders couldn't match. One chronicler noted that the Mongols were capital archers, indeed the best that are known, excellent soldiers and passing valiant in battle. Another observed that they communicated with flags and signals, coordinating movements that European armies achieved through chaos and hope. A papal envoy who later visited the Mongol court noted that they respected military ability above all else, promoted based on merit, and trained rigorously. In other words, for all the religious and cultural framing, there was an underlying awareness that the Mongols had simply been better at warfare. Their weapons were superior. Their tactics were more sophisticated. Their organization was more effective. Their generals were more capable. And, perhaps most importantly, their military culture valued things like logistics, intelligence, coordination, and adaptability that European military culture treated as secondary to individual knightly valor. The story of the Mongol invasion of Europe is often told as a tale of near-miss apocalypse, of how Europe was saved at the last moment by fortunate timing. But it's also a story about what happens when two completely different military systems collide. When one side has advantages, the other side doesn't even know exist. The Mongols didn't just have better technology, they had a better understanding of how to fight wars. They'd learned from conquering China, Persia, and Russia. They'd adapted and incorporated the best ideas from every culture they encountered. By 1241, they'd refined their military arts to a level that wouldn't be matched in Europe for centuries. And the lesson, if there is one, is that military superiority isn't permanent. The Mongols seemed invincible in 1241, and in that moment, against those enemies, they were. But cultures adapt, societies learn. The fortifications Bila built, the military reforms he instituted, these were direct responses to Mongol tactics. By 1285, Hungary held. Europe learned to build stronger castles, to use better intelligence, to create more professional armies. And meanwhile, the Mongol Empire fragmented and declined. The composite bows that were so devastating in 1241 remained formidable, but gunpowder weapons eventually surpassed them. The horse archer armies that seemed unbeatable were eventually made obsolete by artillery and muskets and pikes. Nothing lasts forever, not empires, not military superiority, not even the terror of that spring in 1241 when it seemed like nothing could stop the storm from the east. But for that moment, for those crucial years, the Mongols showed Europe what it meant to face an enemy that was simply better at every aspect of warfare. Better weapons, better tactics, better organization, better generals. The fields at Legnica and Mohi were strewn with the bodies of Europe's finest warriors, and the lesson was written in blood. Courage isn't enough. Honor isn't enough. Individual prowess isn't enough. Wars are won by armies that can coordinate, that can adapt, that can execute complex strategies with discipline and precision. Subutai never got to complete his masterpiece. The invasion of Western Europe remained unfinished, the Atlantic Ocean unreached, the Great Sea that Mongol generals dreamed of conquering still hundreds of miles away when the armies turned back. He died in 1248, an old man by the standards of his era, having conquered more territory than any general in history. His grave, if it exists, is somewhere in Mongolia, unmarked and unknown. But his legacy is the battles he planned and won, the armies he commanded, the impossible distances he coordinated, the strategies that worked with such devastating effectiveness that they're still studied by military historians today. Batu Khan established the Golden Horde and ruled it until his death in 1255. His descendants would control Russian lands for another 2 centuries, leaving a mark on Eastern European history that persists to this day, but he never returned to the West. The moment passed, the window closed, and Europe was spared. The fields of Legnica are quiet now. There's a memorial, though not many people stop to read it. The town of Mohi is a small place in modern Hungary, largely rebuilt after World War II. The Sajo River flows peacefully. Nothing visible remains of the battles that happened there, except the memories in history books and the names on memorials. But for a moment in 1241, those fields were the edge of the world, the place where Christian Europe met the greatest invasion it would ever face and nearly fell. If you found this story of conquest, of brilliant generals and terrifying weapons, of empires clashing and civilizations hanging by threads, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the moments when history pivoted on the edge of a blade. The Mongols came within days of conquering all of Europe, and the only thing that stopped them was a death thousands of miles away, and internal politics most Europeans didn't even know about. Next time you think about how history unfolds, remember that sometimes entire civilizations are saved not by heroes or armies, but by chance, timing, and a Khan dying at exactly the right moment.